I'm Michael Berthold. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of KNIME, a European software company, and we essentially build software to help people, pretty much everybody, make sense of data and AI.
When it comes to making sense of AI and making the most out of AI, everything seems to start with having good data. In your experience, how are financial services companies in particular going about acquiring that data? What kind of data is readily available? It's clean, etc. Do you have any use cases how people that you have worked with are sourcing their data?
Yeah, a lot of our users, open source users, but also customers are the finance department. Some of them are financial institutions as well. They're using our software quite a bit to make sure they have proper ways of cleaning, transforming, and aggregating the data. And they also have ways to later, maybe a year later, be able to audit that and explain how a year ago they derived that clean data set from the usually not so clean sources.
Okay. And what fundamental shifts have you seen, again, thinking about financial services companies in particular, and their approach to AI and machine learning? You've been in this space for some time, so you've probably seen how it's changed. What would you say are some of the biggest shifts the last few years?
So everybody is very interested in using AI, but at the same, of course, also very scared, especially in areas like financial services, where a lot of that data is highly confidential. To be honest, we don't really see that many use cases seriously in production where you say, oh, wow, I never really thought about somebody using AI that way. So a lot of people are having lots of these experimental proof of concepts projects going on, trying out things. But the type of stuff that really ends up in production is typically relatively basic, solid type of implementations of AI, kind of making some of the processes a little bit more efficient to get to those stages, do a little bit of sanity checking on data. That type of stuff we see quite often as use cases.
Do you have any specific example of how one of your customers have used your tool to discover new insight and as a result maybe make changes to the business? Do you have anything that's a significant or standout case maybe?
So the typical first step is usually going away from doing everything in Excel and writing sophisticated macros, super complicated macros, turning that into more of a workflow engine that automates that entire process. So that's kind of just making the work of manipulating the data more reproducible and reliable. And then we have seen people do a lot of sanity checking on their data. So often you have many different views on the data. There's the contracts here, and then there's my CRM system here, and there's my bookkeeping here. And making sure that all of those numbers are actually in sync is something we see our software being used quite often.
So just to help me understand, I understand your software can be used to retrospectively digest data, analyze data, and sort of share some insight. Can it also be plugged into a kind of a live environment where, let's say, a customer is submitting a credit application and you want to benchmark the inputs with, what good looks like? Would that be a use case as well, or is that your tool is not designed for that particular case?
Absolutely. That's typical credit scoring type of applications where you run a model in the background. I'd put that more in the category of classic AI. It's kind of the predictive, what people nowadays call predictive AI, right? Where you have a predictive model that you trained on past data and you're using that to make predictions for the future.
Would people use your platform to experiment? Let's say here's an old data set, for example, a bunch of credit application, and here's how the loans perform. Would they use your tool to experiment, or would that also be done in a separate platform specifically designed around credit underwriting and insights around that?
You could do that as well, to essentially run a simulation. What would happen if we did this, if we had made that decision? What is the risk profile that we're then getting into? Absolutely, yes, you can do that as well. But again, also those are more classic AI type of applications, predictive AI.
Got it. So you kind of touched on this already, but how do you see financial institutions balancing innovation and the desire to do new things with regulatory constraints or risks or even internal compliance policies when it comes to experimenting with the AI tools such as yours?
That's an extremely good point, right? I mean, just the risk of having your data being seen and exposed to some sort of a cloud-based AI is often something that people don't want to do. So having the ability to to channel some of the stuff that you're doing to an AI that you control is one way of doing that. And then the ability to be able to explain what the AI was thinking when it came up with that prediction or that outcome is also super important. But a lot of the more BI style AI vendors, they have tools that give you an answer and you either trust it or you don't, but you have no way of digging in. It's like, how did you come up with that answer, dear AI? And having some sort of almost like a common language between the AI and the human to be able to say, in order to get to that answer, these are the steps that I took. That's super critical for these types of applications where you need to be able to trust the output completely.
So you kind of already mentioned that traditionally people might have used Excel and built very difficult formulas to analyze data, but obviously your platform makes that a lot easier, like no code sort of AI. But that, I guess, means that more people within the organization can now get involved in playing around with data. Do you see any risks, or are organizations seeing any perceived risks about putting AI tools in the hands of, let's say, non-experts? And are there ways that organizations are mitigating that potential risk?
I don't really see a risk with putting these types of tools into the hands of people per se, but of course you need to know what you're doing, right? At the end of the day, interpreting some sort of an analytical outcome requires you to understand what this method was doing. You don't necessarily need to know how all of this stuff was done, but if you can't interpret the results, then you can't make sense of it. So I think that part of data literacy is something that we will still need to teach people to be able to responsibly interpret the results, right? But the advantage of using AI systems is that you don't need to teach everybody all of the little tricky technical details of how to get it done, right? It's almost like you have someone write that complicated Excel macro for you. So you don't need to know how to do that, but you need to understand what the Excel macro actually did in the end.
Well, that's interesting what you say about literacy, because I actually use your platform, and obviously it makes a lot of sense. It's very easy to use. But if I don't know maybe some underlying statistical models, perhaps I'm not able to utilize the full power of the platform. Are you doing anything to kind of spread awareness or literacy, as you mentioned, to so a broader base of users could benefit from using the platform? Or is this kind of up to the organization themselves to figure out if they need to do, or how do you think about that?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's part of the open source offering in a sense. We are trying to get that platform into as many people's hands as possible. And like you say, they need to understand what they're doing. So we offer quite a number of free online resources, courses, textbooks, white papers, videos to help people understand that. At the end of the day, to me, really working data literacy is both a bit of an education as well as an apprenticeship. But you need to understand what these techniques do, otherwise you can't interpret the results. But at the same time, I also believe you need to develop this gut feeling to be able to say, wait a second, that just doesn't smell right.
Yeah, and I guess on that note, like, what do you think most business leaders still misunderstand about building safe and reliable AI models or systems? If there's anything that comes to mind around that?
In my mind, people don't really segment well what they mean when they trust AI. Can you trust AI, right? Because the answer there is not a yes or no, but it really depends, right? If from a data perspective, I'm interested in getting some rough insights into my data, are there certain trends, then I'm okay with the AI not being quite right all the time. If I'm asking the AI to generate a business forecast that I'm then going to use to invest money to hire people to open new positions, that number better be pretty precise, right? So to me, the where you use AI and what you use it for also defines a little bit what you mean by trust. Can I trust it to do that job? And depending on how much more trust I need, I may need a system where the AI can explain to me how it came up with that conclusion.
So
And that
again, yeah, so you've seen the evolution of AI over the course of time, but how do you think it will change over the next, let's say, 5 years? Any predictions about the future?
um, I think we will see many different ways of interacting with AI, because right now, to me, we're almost reaching a little bit of a plateau where it's all, not all, but a lot of it is chatbots, right? Or images, and that's it. That's the way how you interact with AI. But especially also in these financial type applications, you'll have an AI that's not in a creepy way, in a nice way, kind of almost constantly looking over your shoulder and making all sorts of suggestions. And for the UX designers, in my mind, that's a huge challenge, a big opportunity to come up with new interaction ways. How do I really collaboratively work together with an AI to solve a problem? And I think that's where we're going to see a lot of really cool new user interfaces.
And this might be similar to the previous questions, but what technologies, even outside Gen AI or other trends in tech, are you personally keeping a close eye that maybe others are overlooking or underestimating? Any other predictions or thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a computer scientist by training, so to me, it's kind of interesting how people now program machines not just with code but also with prompts, because at the end of the day, the prompt defines or somehow specifies in human language what this is supposed to do, the machine's supposed to do. So to me, it's going to be interesting to see how people debug prompts. How do you figure out why the machine, the AI, didn't do what I wanted it to do, and how do I kind of pin that back to, this is where the prompt is wrong? I think there's still a lot of open research to be done to how do you define proper prompts? How do you control what these prompts are doing, and how do you fix them later?
It actually reminds me, I was debating this with a friend the other day. He's always very polite when he's speaking to his chatbots, saying thanks and please. And I always try to get to the point. And, it's a fundamental kind of belief to your point, what generates which answers and, why was that? So that's really interesting. Is there anything that we haven't touched on today that you think is particularly relevant as we think about the future of Gen AI and no code and low code solutions to help more people use it for business purposes in the financial services sector in particular?
I think the one emphasis that we, of course, place also on low-code tools is that I think we're going to enter an area where data workers don't need to learn how to program anymore, but they're going to find a common language between the AI and the human that allows them to collaborate at the right level of abstraction. So they can really focus on what does this method do, but not the how.
Michael, super interesting. Thank you very much for taking the time to share your thoughts and insights. I look forward to following your work going forward.
Thank you, Chris.